I'm going to say a word of prayer, and then we'll jump into looking at this scripture from today. So if you would pray with me. God, you have called each and every one of us. And now, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing unto you. Amen. So Pastor Emily actually stole my opening question for the kids. What did you all want to be when you grew up? Maybe some of you feel like you're still growing up.
Some of us are growing down.
Some of you are growing down. When I was a kid, I always wanted to be a teacher. And I think the reason why I always wanted to be a teacher was because I had so many great teachers who I could look up to and who helped me figure out how to do multiplication, or who taught me about history, or who just were there to listen when I needed someone to talk to. And so I always wanted to be like them until I got a little bit older. But we'll get back to that. But for now, I want to talk a little bit about the first story that you heard read about the call of the prophet Isaiah. This is a pretty supernatural call experience. It's by no means the only one that we find in Scripture. Moses had the burning bush. That was pretty extreme for being called to do something. And Isaiah, he was a priest. He was in the temple. And all of a sudden, he sees kind of like the feet of God, God's robe and a throne, and it's filling the temple, and the walls start to shake, and these seraphim creatures appear that have 6 wings, 2 to cover their eyes, 2 to cover their feet. And when we say feet in the Old Testament, we usually don't mean your feet. We usually mean your areas that you generally want to keep covered when you're in public. So that's what feet means in the Old Testament. So they have their nakedness being covered, their eyes are covered because no one is supposed to see the face of God, and then they have their 2 wings that are helping them fly. And in Hebrew, the word for seraphim literally means fiery people. So that paints a little image of what these flying creatures look like. They're probably just on fire. And they are worshiping God. They are attending to God's throne. And Isaiah is in the temple, and all of a sudden all this stuff starts happening, and he just says, I am lost and I am unworthy of seeing this image. And the seraphim take tongs, and they take a hot coal from the altar fire that's burning, and they take it to him, and they touch it to his lips, and they tell him that he's been purified by this purification of fire that is happening, so that his mouth is clean and he can share the word of God. But they don't really mention what it would have been like for him to have a hot coal touch his mouth. Like, that just seems to be ignored. But this process of being prepared for what is about to happen next isn't always an easy one. As these seraphim tell him that he is ready to go out and speak to a lost people. Because when Isaiah is calling out that he is lost, he isn't just talking about himself or about his own mouth, but he's talking about the fact that the Israelites have been falling away from God, and they're struggling to remember the promise and the covenant that they have to be God's people. And so Isaiah is bringing all of this to the throne of God in this moment when the temple is filled, and he hears God say, "Who will I send? Who will speak my words to these people, to these lost people?" He's not even talking to Isaiah. He's talking to those who are in his heavenly court, and the seraphim who have filled this place. And Isaiah overhears it and says, "Here I am, Lord, send me." He's just been purified and seeing this heavenly image, and he doesn't hesitate. God isn't even speaking directly to him, but the call is for Isaiah. And he steps up right away and says, "I'll do it." Even though a part of the story that wasn't read this morning is that he has to go and tell the people that things aren't going to be very pleasant for a little while. That because of their disobedience and unwillingness to follow God, they're going to have some hardships to face. But the last message that God tells Isaiah to spread is one of hope, saying that even though the Israelites will be exiled and their land will be destroyed, that there is still hope. So that's one call story that we heard this morning. Kind of this supernatural experience of someone repenting before God and being purified and then being sent out to do something, even though it isn't going to be easy. And then we hear this second story that came from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus is hanging out on the beach preaching to a whole bunch of people who keep getting closer and closer and boxing him in along the water's edge. And he sees these two boats where fishermen are cleaning their nets after a long night of trying to fish and not catching anything. And he says to them, "Hey, can you take me out a little way so I can talk to these people?" And I imagine them being like, "We're tired, we didn't catch anything. It's time to go to sleep, but fine. We'll take you out here so you can talk to your little friends." And so they push back from the shore, and Jesus is talking to the people. He's preaching the word of God, the word of the prophets. He's telling them the stories that Isaiah did, the things that were lived out in the Old Testament, that these Jewish people may or may not have heard. Jesus is preaching the word and the hope of God. And when he's finished, he says to Simon Peter, "Why don't you go out into the deeper water and cast your nets and we'll catch some fish?" And at that point, I feel like I can hear Peter's eye roll through the text of and he even says, this is my paraphrasing, "Dude, we brought you out here so you could do your thing. It was great, good job, but I'm tired. We did this all night and we didn't catch anything. What's going to be different now?" But Jesus persists, so Peter goes out into the deeper water and they cast the fish, or the nets over the side of the boat to catch the fish, because that was their livelihood. At this point in this time in history, in Galilee where they are, fish was the main source of food. They pickled it, they dried it, they cooked it, they did pretty much any way you could eat a fish, they were doing it. And it was one of the main sources of protein and sources of life for these people. And they hadn't caught anything. So they're tired, it's hard work, and I imagine they're just kind of haphazardly "Fine, we'll try one more time." They cast the nets over the side of the boat, and before they know it, the nets are beginning to break because they're so full of fish. You can imagine the astonishment and the joy of just thinking, "Oh good, we'll have enough fish so that we can afford food for ourselves." And they start to try and pull in the nets, and they need help. They need the other boat to come and help them because there are so many. The boats are so full of fish that they begin to sink. That's a lot of fish. This is going to sustain them for a while. And so they start to come into shore, and Peter looks at Jesus and says, "I'm unworthy of this. I'm unworthy of your presence." Peter begins to recognize who this guy might be, because this miracle has been performed. They've caught fish when they tried so hard on their own and they couldn't do it. And this Jesus guy shows up and he talks about the hope of Israel, the hope of God, the hope of the future. And then they catch a ton of fish. And he feels unworthy of it. So he bows down before Jesus and asks for forgiveness, and Jesus says, "Don't worry, there's more to come. And you will not just be a fisherman for fish anymore. I'm calling you to something more. I'm calling you to be a fisher for people." And the fishermen drop their nets and their boats, and they follow him. In the midst of the mundane, something incredible happened. These men are called out of boats and are called to follow a teacher who is proclaiming the holy word of God. These two call stories have a few things in common. There's obviously some very different things. One being one with Isaiah. There were some supernatural effects. There was an earthquake. The temple was full of smoke. There were these fiery things with 6 wings flying. There was a lot going on. But he repented, and he was called to something more. And in this case of Jesus calling the disciples, Jesus is preaching the word of God, the words that Isaiah would have went out and have spoken to the people. And it's in the midst of a mundane task of fishermen casting their nets, where they provide an opportunity for something miraculous to happen, where people will be fed because of these fish that they catch. But again, there's this call to repentance and asking of forgiveness for lack of faith. And Jesus tells Peter and the other disciples that it's okay, but then he's calling them to something more. These men are going to leave their livelihood and follow this guy that they just met. I think that shows just how spectacular Jesus' message of hope was, and how these men were in desperate need of something more. They were being sustained economically and nutritionally by fish, but they knew they needed something more. And God was calling them to that something more. And you might be wondering, what's God calling me to? Or I'm too old to be called to something new. Or I already did all that. Or what does the temple being full of smoke and shaking have to do with me? All of us have our own call story. As I mentioned, there are a ton of different ones throughout the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, as we see the prophets being called by God. There's some crazy things that happens, like eating a scroll, or the burning bush, or Noah ends up in the belly of a whale because he doesn't follow his call. There's all of these crazy things that happen, but the consistent thing is that God meets us right where we are. Whether it's done in the spectacular or done in the mundane, God meets us where we are. When I was little and I was growing up, I didn't always know exactly what I wanted to do. But I knew I wanted to be like those gracious adults who helped guide me along the way. My teachers, my parents. And then when I was in high school, I wasn't sure what my future would look like. Being born with a disability and being visually impaired, I was always surprising people with what I was able to do. And that was just me living the way my parents taught me to. Never letting anything be an excuse, but working my hardest. When I was in 7th grade, I had someone say to me, I really appreciate that you never use your vision as a crutch. And I thought, wait, that's an option? Why did no one tell me that before? But I was grateful that it hadn't occurred to me, because my parents never let that be an excuse. Never let that stop me from doing what I wanted to do. Skiing, horseback riding, water skiing, marching band, whatever. They always encouraged me to do my best. And then when I was junior in high school and all my friends were learning how to drive, that was one thing where usually pushing through wasn't able to work. For the safety of myself and others, I would be unable to drive. When you're 17 and all your friends are getting cars and you can't, it's difficult. Especially when you're as independent and stubborn as I am. But I knew that there had to be a reason. I was taught that God was with me no matter what. And that there had to be a reason, not a reason for everything, but that there was something more to come. So one night I was sitting in my room reading my Bible, because that's what good Christian girls do, and I came across this passage that is in John, and I've told some of you this before, but it was a passage where Jesus' disciples and Tim are walking, and they come across a blind man, and they say, Jesus, who sinned that this man was born blind? Because in their culture, they were under the assumption that if someone was suffering in some way, it was because they had sinned, and it was their fault, so that was their punishment. And Jesus looked at them and said, no one. This man was born this way so that God's glory could be shown in his life. And Jesus heals the blind man. I felt that passage jump off the page at me. Not the Jesus heals the blind man part, but this man was born this way so that my glory, that God's glory could be shown in his life. And I knew then that God was knocking on the doors of my heart with something more. That I was being called to something greater. In the midst of the mundane, Jesus was showing up in a big way. telling me that I might end up fishing for people. Luckily, that doesn't involve hooks or worms, so we're doing all right. But I fought it for a while, went to college, and then I knew that I might as well go to seminary because this is what I was going to be doing, and I didn't want to wait, and I was just going to do it. And now here I am, standing in front of you as your pastor. Amen. Thank you. Not only do you all accept me, even in spite of, as some people would say, the fact that I was born with a disability.
Maybe because of.
And not only that, but you accept me and you accept my wife as your pastors. And we are so blessed to be in a place where that is okay. A place where our call is affirmed by all of you, no matter our sexual orientation, our abilities, our race, whatever. The United Methodist Church here is accepting and is loving and is moving forward in the call that God has placed on all of you. The mission of the United Methodist Church says that we are to create disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That's a big calling. Whether that looks like you driving your neighbor to the doctor's office, or providing food for someone in need, or just sitting and listening to someone tell you their story. You all are living out the call that God has placed on your life. And sure, you might not see the feet of God in the throne room with fiery angels, or you might not catch 1,000 fish, but we are following the call that God has placed on our lives. And I encourage you to keep an eye out, because you never know whose life you're going to impact. I like to think of life as this tapestry where there are certain people whose strings shine a little bit brighter, and as you look back on the tapestry of your life, you notice those different threads and think, oh, that's the person who told me this. Or you might not even know their name. One of the most important people to my journey of my call is a woman who I met at a nursing home in Baltimore, Maryland. So after I shared my testimony, she said, you don't need your vision to see because you see through your faith. That woman's thread is one of the brightest ones in my tapestry. And you all have your own tapestries as well. But I encourage you to keep living out that call that God has placed on your life, no matter what it looks like. You're never too old or too young or too whatever. God has created each of us in the image of God's self, so that we can love one another. We can shine God's grace on one another. One of my favorite quotes is that our calling is where the world's deep hunger and our deep gladness meet. So figure out, what is the world's deep hunger? And what is your deep gladness? Where do those two meet? Do they meet at the church? Do they meet in the town plaza? Do they meet on the street talking to someone who is unhoused? Or do they meet in the midst of your own family, making sure that everyone feels loved and accepted because of who they are? Wherever those things meet, God is there. And God is helping lead you to that place. So know that you are called and you are loved, and we're all in this together. So may it be so.